Hi everyone, welcome to the lecture for Chapter 20 on Oncology, which is the study of cancer. We're going to start off with a little bit about differentiating between benign and malignant tumors, and then some of the primary terms related to tumor growth, different risk factors, and then medical specialists who focus on treating oncological disorders. And then there will be some other things that you can continue to learn on your own from this. So cancer is a class of disease that is characterized by uncontrolled cell growth. So uncontrolled division of cells and growth of those cells. And they often have the ability to invade other tissues, either through direct growth into adjacent tissues or by spreading to distant tissues through metastasizing. So we talk about different types of cancer. Primary bone cancer would be tumors that are in the bone. But if that metastasizes and moves to other places, secondary bone cancer or bone metastasis occurs when those cancers move to other regions of the body. So you started off with bone cancer, and now you have, in addition to bone cancer, you have breast cancer, or prostate cancer, or lung cancer. Oncology then is the study of the prevention, causes, and treatment of tumors and cancer. So what are tumors? Tumors are also called neoplasms. They're an abnormal growth of body tissue that creates a mass, but you have both benign tumors and malignant tumors. So a benign tumor is non-life threatening, and myoma is a benign tumor made up of muscle tissue. Malignant tumors are forms of cancer that can be life-threatening, and myosarcoma is a malignant tumor derived from muscle tissue. So myoma is the benign version, myosarcoma is the malignant version. So with regard to tumor growth, so carcinogenesis is the process through which normal cells become cancer cells. Okay? And you'll hear about chemicals being carcinogenic, and that is things that can lead to carcinogenesis. When you have normal cell growth, and hopefully you learned this in your intro bio class, cells divide, they become differentiated, they follow a fairly orderly fashion, and they do things like only divide when they have correct growth factors. They only divide when there is suitable space. Most animal cells can only divide when they are attached to something. And so cancer cells can violate all of those different rules. So here we have normal cell growth, and you can see that here with differentiation of cells. You see some eye-shaped cells and some rounded cells and a layer of cells on the surface there. Hyperplasia is when you get an increase in the cell number. So here we see an increase in the cell number of these rounded cells, displacing some of the more eye-shaped cells. Okay. Dysplasia is when you start to get the abnormal disordered growth, and you can see cells just kind of in weird random locations. And then anaplasia is two things. One is you lose your differentiation, and the other is it starts to invade other tissues. So when you lose differentiation, they start to become more like stem cells, but then they start to grow without growth factors, and there are a variety of things then that will lead to them growing out of control. So where does cancer come from? So every time a cell divides, there's a possibility of there being an error introduced into the genes. Okay? When those errors occur in the genes, then the cell starts to behave differently and may do things like no longer respond to the absence of growth factor. They'll just grow on their own without growth factor. Okay? Proto-oncogene is a normal gene that controls the normal process, and then an oncogene is a mutated gene that can cause the cancers to form. And then here's hyperplasia, dysplasia, and anaplasia defined in more detail. Hyperplasia, an increase in the number of cells. Dysplasia is that abnormal growth. And then anaplasia, again, is an uncontrolled growth and poor differentiation, and you see this most often in malignant tumors. Now the cells may form abnormal shapes, and this is something that a pathologist can look at to determine if they are normal cells or cancer cells. They also may live longer than normal cells. So a normal cell has a life cycle and eventually goes through a process called apoptosis. And during apoptosis, those cells are essentially killed off. And cancer cells sometimes don't respond to signals for apoptosis, and they just continue to exist and continue to grow. Now, the other part is, I mentioned growth factors. Sometimes they can grow without growth factors because they produce their own growth factors, and this process is called angiogenesis. So risk factors for cancer. So risk factors, you probably know about several of them. We talk about wearing sunscreen to prevent cancer. We talk about whether you have genetic predispositions to it, whether you have environmental exposures. So let's go through a few of these. The hereditary cancer syndromes come from certain genes that are passed down, and those are often just linked with, they're not an indication that you're going to get cancer, but they're an indication that you have a much higher likelihood of getting cancer. So the BRCA1 and BRCA2 are related to that, or those types of genes. Now, in a lifestyle choice, smoking tobacco, that increases risk of developing lung cancer and other cancers, and it's a causative factor in 90% of the lung cancer cases in the United States. Alcohol consumption can increase the risk of cancers. And then, interestingly, a virus, the human papilloma virus, can cause certain types of cancer, especially cervical cancer, but also mouth, pharynx, vaginal, anal, and penis cancer. All right. Obesity, sedentary lifestyle, poor diet, those can cause a few different types of cancer. Chemical exposure, such as exposure to glyphosate, can cause cancer. So glyphosate is what the chemical Roundup. Air pollution can cause cancer, and as well as water pollution. Okay, so water pollution, chemical runoff, and then exposure to radiation can cause cancer. So Rosalind Franklin, one of the people instrumental in discovering the structure of DNA, was an X-ray crystallographer, and unfortunately she developed cancer and died at a fairly young age, and died before she was able to be awarded a Nobel Prize. Doctors often recommend a diet full of antioxidants, and so here's some example of antioxidants like blueberries, cranberries, avocado, tomatoes, a bunch of different things that will decrease your risk of getting cancers. Right? And then medical specialties related to this. A pathologist is a person who will go into the laboratory and look at cell samples and determine if those are cancerous or benign. Oncologist is the person who studies the prevention, causes, and treatment of cancer. Radiation therapist is a medical profession who specializes in delivery of radiation. So while radiation can cause cancer, it also is widely used in treating cancers. And then chemotherapy nurse is a registered nurse who specializes in the administration of intravenous chemotherapeutic agents.